Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. 22 years of climbing had taught me to respect the mountains, but nothing prepared me for what happened on Grandfather Mountain last October. I was living in Boone at the time, teaching wilderness survival courses at the Outdoor Recreation Center and spending every free weekend exploring the high country trails. My wife Janet thought I was crazy for going solo that particular Saturday, especially with the weather reports showing a cold front moving in, but I'd climbed in worse conditions. The leaves had just turned that brilliant burnt orange you only see in the Appalachians, and I wanted to catch the sunrise from McRae Peak before the tourist season really kicked in. I'd done this route maybe 40 times before, knew every switchback, every false summit, every spot where the trail got sketchy. That morning started like any other climb. Just me, my pack, and the familiar burn in my legs as I pushed up the steep grade in the pre-dawn darkness. The first odd thing happened around 6:30 a.m., just as the sun was breaking through the tree line. I'd stopped at Attic Window, this natural rock formation that gives you a perfect view of the valley below, when I heard someone calling out, not screaming exactly, but that urgent kind of yell you do when you need help but you're trying to conserve energy. The voice was male, maybe middle-aged, and it was coming from somewhere off the main trail to the northwest. Now there's nothing but sheer drops and virgin forest in that direction, no marked trails for miles. I pulled out my phone to mark my GPS location and noticed I had 0 signal, which was weird because I usually got at least 1 bar up there. The calling continued maybe every 30 seconds or so, and each time it sounded more desperate. "Help me. Is anyone there, please?" The words echoed off the granite faces, making it hard to pinpoint exactly where they originated. But I'd been trained in search and rescue basics, and everything in my gut told me someone was in serious trouble out there. I shouted back, cupping my hands around my mouth to project my voice better. "Where are you? Keep yelling so I can find you." The response came immediately, and this time I could hear relief flooding through the person's voice. "Thank God, I'm down here. I fell yesterday afternoon. I think my leg's broken." Yesterday afternoon. That meant this guy had been out here all night in 40-degree weather. I pulled out my emergency whistle and gave 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for help, hoping maybe other hikers would hear and could assist. The forest went quiet for a moment. Then the voice came again, clearer now, maybe 200 yards below me through thick rhododendron and mountain laurel. I studied the terrain, trying to figure out the safest approach. The slope was probably 60 degrees, covered in loose scree and fallen logs, with patches of that slick moss that grows on the north faces. Going down there alone broke every rule I taught my students, but what choice did I have? I couldn't leave someone injured out there, and by the time I hiked back to the ranger station and returned with help, it could be too late. I secured my main pack to a sturdy pine with a carabiner, keeping just my first aid kit, rope, water, and emergency supplies in my day pack. Before heading down, I built a small cairn at the trail's edge and tied a bright orange bandana to a branch, marking my exit point. The descent was treacherous from the start. The leaf litter was still damp from morning dew, and underneath, the soil was loose and crumbly. Every step sent small avalanches of dirt and pebbles cascading down. I had to turn sideways, digging my boots in hard, grabbing onto saplings and roots to control my descent. About 50 feet down, I found something that made me pause, a weathered blue climbing rope, partially buried under leaves, tied around a thick oak. The rope was old, maybe from the 90s based on the weave pattern, and it extended down into the understory before disappearing. Someone else had come this way before, probably years ago. The voice called out again, closer now, maybe 100 yards ahead. "I can hear you moving. Please hurry, I'm so cold." I grabbed the old rope, tested it with my full weight, and when it held, used it to rappel down the steepest section, my mind already racing with questions about who had left it there and why. The forest changed as I descended. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees, and the air became thick with the smell of rotting vegetation and something else, something metallic. The trees were different down here too, older, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes, probably from decades of fighting for sunlight in this narrow ravine. I noticed more ropes as I went, different colors and ages, some tied to trees, others just lying across rocks like they'd been dropped in a hurry. There were other things too. A rusted carabiner here, a torn piece of rain jacket there, an old boot with the sole completely separated from the upper. All of it was scattered across maybe a 50-foot area, like debris from multiple expeditions over the years. The calling had stopped, which worried me. "Hey, I'm coming. Talk to me so I can find you." The response came from directly below, maybe 20 feet down a near vertical drop. "Down here in the ravine, please, I can't move." I reached the edge and looked down into a narrow gully, maybe 4 feet wide, carved into the mountainside by centuries of water runoff. The bottom was in deep shadow, but I could make out a figure in a red jacket sitting propped against the rock wall. I rigged my rope to a solid anchor and rappelled down into the gully. The man looked to be in his 50s, gray beard, expensive gear that suggested he knew what he was doing out here. His left leg was bent at an ugly angle, and his face was pale, lips slightly blue from the cold. But something was wrong with the picture. His pack was sitting neatly beside him, fully organized, and despite claiming he'd been there since yesterday afternoon, his clothes were relatively clean. No mud, no tears, just some dust. "Thank God you found me," he said, and his voice was different now, calmer, less desperate. "I thought I was going to die down here like the others." I was checking his pulse when that last word registered. "Others?" He nodded toward the back of the gully, deeper into the shadows. That's when I saw them. At first my brain tried to process them as more scattered gear, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized I was looking at least 3, maybe 4 old backpacks, covered in moss and leaves, tucked against the far wall. The metallic smell was stronger here, and underneath the packs I could see what looked like torn fabric and other things I didn't want to identify. My training kicked in, that automatic risk assessment you do when a situation suddenly shifts from rescue to potential danger. The man was watching me carefully now, his eyes tracking my every movement. I kept my voice steady, professional. "How many others? When?" He shifted slightly, wincing in what seemed like theatrical pain. "Oh, over the years. This spot, it's like a funnel, you know. People hear someone calling for help, they come down that same slope you did, following the old ropes. But getting back up..." He gestured at the smooth walls of the gully, slick with moisture and algae. "Getting back up is the hard part, especially when you're trying to carry an injured person." I stood slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the fixed blade knife on my belt. The walls were indeed smooth, almost polished, and now that I really looked, the only way out was the way I'd come in, straight up that 20-foot wall. "Your leg," I said. "It doesn't look broken from here." He smiled then, a thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. "No, I suppose it doesn't. But it got your attention, didn't it? Just like it got theirs." He nodded again toward the old backpacks, and I noticed for the first time that they were arranged almost deliberately, like trophies. The math was simple and terrifying. This man had been using the same distress call to lure experienced climbers down into this natural trap, probably for years. The old ropes on the slope weren't from rescue attempts going down. They were from desperate attempts to climb back up while being pursued. I kept my breathing controlled, didn't want him to see the adrenaline spike hitting my system. "You're not hurt at all, are you?" He stood up smoothly, no sign of injury, and pulled something from behind his pack. It was a climbing axe, old but well-maintained, the kind with a hammerhead on the back. "People always come," he said, his voice conversational now, almost friendly. "Good people, helpful people. They hear someone in trouble and they just can't help themselves. 22 years you've been climbing, right? That's what you said up there. All that experience, all that training, and you still came down here alone." He was right. I'd told him too much, given away my experience level when I was trying to reassure him. The distance between us was maybe 15 feet. He was blocking the spot where my rope hung, probably intentionally. My phone was useless down here, and even if I screamed, sound wouldn't carry out of this ravine. I could see scratches on the walls now, sets of them at different heights, like claw marks from people trying to climb the smooth rock in desperation. "You know what the funny thing is?" he continued, taking a step closer, testing the weight of the axe in his hand. "Nobody ever reports these missing hikers in the right place. They disappear from the main trails, their cars get found at different trailheads, and search teams focus on the marked routes. Nobody thinks to look in a random ravine a quarter-mile off trail. By the time anyone might accidentally find this place, nature's taken care of the evidence. Animals, weather, decomposition. These mountains keep secrets really well." I'd already spotted my only advantage. I was younger, probably stronger, and definitely in better climbing shape. But he had the weapon and knew this terrain intimately. I started circling slowly to my left, trying to get an angle where I could reach my rope. "They'll find my pack up there," I said. "My wife knows exactly where I went today." He laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls. "Your pack is 50 feet below the trail, down a slope nobody would search unless they knew exactly where to look. And your wife thinks you're on the Daniel Boone Scout Trail, doesn't she? That's what you always tell her when you come up here alone. I heard you mention it on the trail last month when you passed me. You probably don't even remember seeing me, just another old-timer taking a rest on a rock." The recognition hit me like ice water. I did remember him vaguely, a tired-looking older hiker sitting on a boulder near the Cragway Trail junction about 3 weeks ago. I'd been on the phone with Janet telling her my plans for today's hike, and had nodded at him as I passed. He'd been listening, planning, waiting. The realization that this wasn't random, that he'd possibly been watching me for weeks, made my skin prickle. I lunged suddenly toward my rope, but he was ready, swinging the axe in a wide arc that forced me back against the opposite wall. The blade struck the rock inches from where I'd been, sending chips flying. "The thing is," he said, pulling the axe free, "you experienced climbers always think you can outmaneuver someone like me. But I've been doing this for 8 years. Started after my retirement, when I realized how easy it was. How many people just disappear out here. 8 years. How many people had stood exactly where I was standing? I thought about all the missing hiker reports I'd heard over the years, the ones that never made sense, experienced outdoorsmen who just vanished. My fingers found a loose rock behind me, about the size of a baseball, and I slowly worked it free from the wall. What happened next was pure instinct, mixed with luck. He came at me again, this time with an overhead swing meant to split my skull, but the confined space worked against him. The axe handle hit the wall on his backswing, throwing off his timing just enough. I threw the rock hard at his face, catching him in the left eye, and dove under his arm toward the rope. He screamed, stumbling backward, one hand going to his bleeding eye. I grabbed my rope and started climbing, using techniques I hadn't practiced since my competition days, feet smearing against the smooth rock, arms burning as I hauled myself up. Behind me, I could hear him recovering, cursing, and then the whistle of the axe through air. It caught my boot heel, tearing through the rubber but missing flesh. I kept climbing, pure adrenaline overriding the screaming in my muscles. 10 feet, 15 feet, my hands were bleeding from the friction, but I could see the top edge. That's when he did something I didn't expect. He started cutting my rope from below, not frantically but methodically, using the axe blade to saw through the fibers where it hung against the rock. I had maybe seconds before it gave way completely. I made a desperate decision and let go of the rope, launching myself sideways toward a tiny ledge I'd noticed on the way down, barely 18 inches wide. My fingers caught it just as the rope went slack, cut clean through. For a moment I hung there by just my fingertips, feet scrambling for any purchase on the smooth rock. Below, he was already moving, looking for another angle of attack, but I'd rock climbed since I was 15, and muscle memory took over. I found a microscopic foothold, just a bump really, and pushed up, reaching for a root that jutted out 3 feet from the top. My fingers wrapped around it just as he threw the axe. It spun past my head, so close I felt the wind from it, and disappeared into the forest above. Using the root, I hauled myself over the edge, rolling away from the ravine and immediately scrambling to my feet. I could hear him down there, not calling for help now, but raging, promising that he'd find me, that he knew these mountains better than anyone. I ran, not back toward the trail, but straight through the forest, crashing through laurel thickets, jumping over logs, putting as much distance as possible between me and that ravine. It took me 3 hours to find a trail I recognized, and another 2 to make it back to the parking area. My hands were torn to shreds, my boots were ruined, and I was covered in cuts and bruises, but I was alive. I drove straight to the ranger station, my bloody hands leaving prints on the steering wheel. The rangers didn't believe me at first, thought maybe I'd had a panic attack or hallucinated from dehydration. But when I showed them the GPS coordinates I'd marked on my phone before descending, when they saw my injuries and the deliberate cut marks on what was left of my rope, they organized a search team. 2 days later, they found the ravine. The man was gone, of course, but everything else was there. The old backpacks, remains from at least 6 different people dating back almost a decade, and enough evidence to launch a massive investigation. They found his camp eventually, about a half-mile from the ravine, hidden in a cave he'd been using as a base. Inside were wallets, phones, pieces of climbing gear taken as trophies, and a journal where he'd documented each kill with disturbing detail. His real name was Howard Brennan, a retired insurance adjuster from Charlotte who'd been visiting the mountains regularly since his retirement. The FBI traced at least 11 missing hiker cases to him, though they suspected there were more. They never caught him. Search teams combed those mountains for months, brought in dogs, helicopters, even thermal imaging drones, but Howard Brennan had vanished as completely as his victims once had. The theory is that he had multiple hideouts throughout the Appalachians, places he'd scouted over the years, and he's still out there somewhere, maybe in Tennessee or Virginia now, starting over with the same routine. Moved away from Boone the following spring, took a teaching job at a community college in the Midwest, where the biggest hill for 500 miles is a highway overpass. Janet and I don't talk about it much, but she knows I haven't touched my climbing gear since that day. Sometimes I get emails from other climbers, people who've heard the story and want to know if it's really true, if someone could really do what Brennan did for so many years without being caught. I tell them all the same thing: stay on the marked trails, never climb alone, and if you hear someone calling for help from somewhere they shouldn't be, get the rangers. Don't be a hero. The mountains are full of predators, and not all of them walk on 4 legs. The worst part is knowing he studied us, learned our habits, our kindness, our instinct to help, and turned it into a weapon against us. And somewhere tonight, on some remote trail, he might be sitting on a rock, just another tired old hiker taking a break, listening to passing climbers talk about their plans, waiting for the next good Samaritan to come along. I've been caving for about 15 years now, mostly in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, where the limestone creates these incredible underground networks that stretch for miles. It was a Thursday in early September 2018, and I'd taken a week off from my job as a geology teacher in Lexington to explore some of the less documented cave systems near the Red River Gorge. I was 34 then, recently divorced, and throwing myself into my hobbies was basically how I dealt with the empty apartment and the silence that came with it. My friend Garrett had mentioned this particular cave entrance he'd spotted while hiking off-trail near Wolfe County. Said it looked promising but hadn't gone in because he didn't have his gear. The entrance was small, maybe 3 feet wide, hidden behind a cluster of mountain laurel that had grown thick and wild. I almost missed it myself, even with his directions. The first thing that struck me as wrong was the smell coming from inside. Not the usual damp earth and mineral scent you get in most caves, but something organic and old, like wet leather left to rot. I clicked on my headlamp and squeezed through the entrance, my pack scraping against the limestone walls. About 20 feet in, the passage opened into a decent-sized chamber, maybe 15 feet high and 30 feet across. That's when I saw the first arrangement. Small bones, looked like rabbit or squirrel, laid out in a perfect spiral pattern on a flat rock near the wall. The bones were clean, bleached white, and definitely placed there deliberately. Each one was positioned with the joint end pointing inward, creating this disturbing pinwheel effect. My first thought was maybe some teenagers had been messing around, trying to be edgy or whatever. But the bones looked old, and there was a thick layer of undisturbed dust around the pattern that suggested it had been there for years. I decided to keep going, following the main passage as it sloped downward. The cave system was more extensive than I'd expected. After about 40 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly narrow passages, I'd mapped at least 300 meters. The temperature dropped steadily, and my breath came out in small clouds. Then I found the second chamber, and this time what I saw made me stop dead. There were more bone arrangements, but these were different. Human teeth arranged in perfect circles on 5 different ledges, each circle containing exactly 28 teeth. Adult teeth, all of them. Some still had silver fillings that caught my headlamp's beam. Between the circles, someone had scratched numbers into the rock. 1982, 1989, 1993, 2001, 2008. The scratches looked fresh in some places, old and worn in others, like someone had been coming back to trace over them. My breathing got shallow and I had to force myself to stay calm and analytical. These could be medical specimens, maybe from a dental school, but why bring them here? Why arrange them like this? The passage continued deeper, and against every instinct telling me to turn around, I kept going. About 50 feet past the teeth chamber, I found the belongings. A moldy canvas backpack from what looked like the 70s or 80s, a woman's leather wallet with a driver's license from West Virginia dated 1991. The plastic was warped, but I could still make out the name, Melissa Thornton. There was a class ring from Marshall University 1987, and a child's sneaker, size maybe 3, with cartoon characters I didn't recognize faded on the side. These items weren't scattered randomly. They were placed on natural shelves in the rock, organized almost like a display. The wallet was open to show the license. The ring was positioned to catch light. The shoe was set perfectly straight. I took photos of everything, my camera flash harsh and jarring in the darkness. The silence down there was absolute. No dripping water, no air movement, just my own breathing and the blood pounding in my ears. I pulled out my phone to check if I had any signal to call the police. Nothing, of course, this deep underground. That's when I heard it. Voices, definitely human, coming from somewhere deeper in the cave system. Not echoes of my own movement, but actual conversation, low, mumbled, like people talking casually. The sound was distorted by the rock formations, making it impossible to make out words, but I could distinguish at least 2 different speakers, maybe 3. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it. Maybe there was another entrance. Maybe other cavers had come in from a different route. But other cavers would have lights, would make noise moving through the passages, would have left some sign at the entrance. These voices sounded stationary, like people just sitting and talking somewhere in the dark. I turned off my headlamp and stood completely still, trying to pinpoint the direction. The voices continued, rising and falling in a conversational rhythm, occasionally punctuated by what sounded like quiet laughter. Following the voices meant going through a narrow crawl space that opened up ahead, maybe 18 inches high and 3 feet wide. I had to take off my pack and push it ahead of me, military crawling through the limestone tube. The rock was smooth here, worn down like something had been dragged through it repeatedly over many years. About halfway through the crawl, my hand hit something soft and wet. I jerked back instinctively, then forced myself to reach out again. It was fabric, denim, partially decomposed, slimy with cave moisture. As I pushed it aside, I felt the distinctive shape of a belt buckle still attached. The voices were getting clearer now, and I could swear one of them sounded female, almost cheerful. The crawl space opened into another passage where I could stand again, and I saw light ahead. Not daylight, but artificial light, steady and yellow like old incandescent bulbs. Who the hell runs electricity this deep into a cave? The passage curved sharply to the left, and I moved as quietly as possible, keeping close to the wall. The voices were clear now, 2 men and a woman, talking about everyday things. One man was complaining about gas prices. The woman mentioned something about her daughter's school. It was so mundane, so normal, that it made the whole situation even more disturbing. As I peered around the curve, I saw them. 3 people sitting in camping chairs in a roughly circular chamber, lit by a string of work lights that had been bolted into the ceiling. They looked completely ordinary. The woman wore jeans and a University of Kentucky sweatshirt. One man had on coveralls like a mechanic. The other wore khakis and a polo shirt. They were drinking coffee from a thermos, passing it around. Behind them, I could see more passages leading off into darkness, and along the walls were metal shelving units filled with plastic containers, labeled with years going back to the 1970s. What made me sick to my stomach wasn't just their presence here. It was how comfortable they looked, how routine this seemed for them. The man in coveralls stood up and walked over to one of the containers, pulled it out, and started sorting through what looked like personal effects: watches, rings, a pair of glasses. He was cataloging them in a notebook, writing carefully like he was doing inventory at a store. The woman laughed at something the other man said, and the sound echoed off the walls in a way that made my skin prickle. Then she said something that made me stop breathing entirely. "We should probably check on the new ones before they wake up. Last batch took almost 3 days to stop screaming, and I don't want to deal with that again." The casual way she said it, like she was talking about checking on laundry, made bile rise in my throat. The man in khakis checked his watch, a perfectly normal gesture that seemed obscene in this context, and said they had another hour before they needed to make rounds. I started backing away slowly, trying not to disturb any loose rocks. My mind was racing. I needed to get out, get to the police, but I also needed more evidence. These people had been doing something here for decades, and from what the woman said, they had victims somewhere deeper in the cave. Every part of me wanted to run, but I forced myself to pull out my phone and record video. Even without signal, it would save to my device. I got about 30 seconds of footage when the man in coveralls suddenly stopped writing and looked up, staring directly at the passage where I was hiding. "Did you hear that?" he asked the others. They all went quiet, listening. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall. The woman stood up slowly, reaching for something on one of the shelves. It looked like a flashlight, but longer, heavier. "Might be an animal," the man in khakis said. But he was also standing now, moving toward my position. I couldn't wait any longer. I turned and started moving back through the passage as quickly and quietly as I could, but speed and stealth don't go together in a cave. My boots scraped against rock, my pack bumped the walls. Behind me, I heard the woman say sharply, "Someone's here, check all the passages." Their footsteps echoed behind me, and they were moving fast. They knew this cave system far better than I did. When I reached the crawl space, I dove in without thinking, pushing my pack ahead frantically. Halfway through, I heard one of them enter the other side, saw the beam of a flashlight sweep across the limestone just inches from my feet. "Got someone," the man's voice boomed through the narrow space. I kicked backwards hard, heard him grunt, and scrambled out the other side. The passages that had seemed so fascinating on the way in now felt like a trap, each turn potentially leading to a dead end or another member of their group. I ran through the chamber with the teeth circles, past the arranged bones, my headlamp beam swinging wildly as I moved. Behind me, their voices echoed through the tunnels, coordinating like they'd done this before. "Block the main entrance," I heard the woman shout. "Tommy, take the north passage." They had names for the passages. They knew every inch of this place. My chest was burning from the exertion and the panic, but I kept moving, using my memory of the route in. At one point, I turned off my headlamp and navigated by touch for about 30 feet, hoping to throw them off. I could hear them getting closer, their footsteps more confident than mine on the uneven floor. When I turned a corner and saw faint daylight ahead from the entrance, my heart jumped. But as I got closer, I saw a figure silhouetted against the opening. Another person, just standing there, waiting. I veered off into a side passage I hadn't explored before, praying it would connect to another exit. The side passage narrowed and then opened into a small chamber with multiple openings. I picked one at random and kept going, emerging after what felt like hours but was probably minutes into bright daylight through a different entrance about 200 yards from where I'd entered. I ran to my car, my legs shaking so badly I could barely drive. I went straight to the state police station in Jackson, showed them the video, the photos, gave them the exact coordinates. They sent a team out that same day, but when they got there, the cave was empty. The bones were gone, the belongings were gone, the lights and shelving units all gone. The only thing they found was my pack, which I'd dropped in the scramble, placed neatly at the original entrance. The detective told me there were no records of a Melissa Thornton from West Virginia being reported missing in 1991, but that didn't mean much. People go missing without reports all the time. They kept the cave under surveillance for weeks, but no one ever showed up. I still have the photos and video on my phone, but people who see them say they could be staged, that the quality is too poor to prove anything. I know what I saw. I know those people are still out there somewhere, using some other cave system now, organizing their terrible collection. I haven't been caving since. The drive up to eastern Kentucky took me 11 hours from Tampa, but I was determined to finally piece together the Porter side of my family tree. It was early May 2017, and I'd just turned 35, divorced for 2 years, with nothing but time on my hands and a folder full of old census records pointing me toward the hills near Pine Mountain. My great-grandmother had supposedly lived somewhere in these parts before moving to Florida in the 1940s, and after months of hitting dead ends with online records, I figured the only way forward was to actually go there myself. The rental car struggled on those winding mountain roads, and I remember gripping the steering wheel harder with each hairpin turn, wondering if my obsession with dead relatives was worth potentially joining them. But something about not knowing where you come from, it eats at you, especially when you're sitting alone in an empty apartment with nothing but genealogy websites for company. I'd arranged to meet a local named Virgil Combs at a gas station just outside of Harlan. He'd responded to my post on a regional history forum, saying he knew the old Porter properties and could show me around for $100 cash. When I pulled into that rundown Citgo station that morning, Virgil was already there, leaning against a rust-eaten Ford pickup that looked older than both of us combined. He was maybe 60, wearing overalls that had seen better decades, with teeth stained yellow from what I assumed was a lifetime of tobacco. His left eye had this cloudy film over it, like milk swirled in coffee, and when he smiled, the gaps between his remaining teeth made him look like a broken piano keyboard. But he seemed friendly enough, showed me some old survey maps he'd brought along, and pointed out where 3 different Porter homesteads had been built back in the early 1900s. 2 were completely gone, he said, torn down or burned, but one was still standing way up on Copper Creek Ridge, about an hour's hike from where we could park the vehicles. The trail up to the homestead was barely visible under all the kudzu and mountain laurel that had taken over. Virgil moved through those woods like he'd been born in them, his bad leg dragging slightly but never slowing him down, while I stumbled behind him trying not to trip on exposed roots or get my face caught in spider webs. The deeper we went, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our feet crunching dead leaves and the occasional crack of a branch. About 30 minutes in, Virgil stopped suddenly and pointed to some trees ahead of us where someone had carved symbols into the bark. Not letters or initials, but these weird, geometric patterns that looked fresh, maybe only weeks old. He mumbled something about mountain folk marking territory and kept walking, but I noticed he started moving faster, like he wanted to get past that area quickly. The forest felt different after that, heavier somehow, and I kept getting this sensation like we were walking through someone's backyard uninvited. When we finally reached the clearing where the old porterhouse stood, I honestly couldn't believe it was still upright. The whole structure leaned to the left like it was slowly sinking into the earth, with vines crawling up every wall and through the broken windows. But what caught my attention wasn't the house itself, it was everything around it that didn't fit. There were new tarps stretched between trees, creating makeshift shelters, and I could see modern camping gear scattered around. Coleman lanterns, plastic water jugs, even what looked like a solar panel propped against a stump. Fresh laundry hung on a line running from the house to a nearby oak tree, still damp from morning dew. Virgil's whole demeanor changed when he saw all this, his good eye darting around the clearing like he was counting exits, and he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, whispering that we needed to leave right now, that this wasn't abandoned anymore, and the people living here weren't the type you wanted to meet. But I'd driven 11 hours and paid this man $100, and there I was, standing in front of my great-grandmother's childhood home, possibly the last physical connection to that side of my family. I shrugged off Virgil's grip and told him I just needed 5 minutes to look inside, take some pictures, maybe find some old family belongings or documents. He kept shaking his head, backing away toward the tree line, saying something about how these mountain squatters didn't take kindly to outsiders, especially outsiders asking questions about property ownership. That should have been my second warning, the way his voice cracked when he said it. But I was already walking toward the front porch, my phone out, ready to document everything. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and the front door was barely hanging on one hinge, revealing a dark interior that smelled like mold and something else. Something chemical and sharp, like battery acid mixed with ammonia. Inside, the house was a maze of garbage and makeshift living spaces. Sleeping bags were spread across what used to be the living room, surrounded by piles of canned goods, car batteries hooked up to wires running along the ceiling, and plastic buckets filled with liquids I didn't want to identify. On the walls, someone had tacked up dozens of photocopied documents, land deeds, court records, pages from law books, all highlighted and annotated with angry scrawls about sovereign rights and fraudulent government claims. In what might have been the kitchen, I found a table covered with more recent additions, driver's licenses from different states, all with different names but similar-looking photos, and manila folders stuffed with social security cards. My phone camera was clicking away, documenting everything, when I heard Virgil's voice from outside, except he wasn't talking to me. He was having a conversation with someone else, his tone completely different, friendlier, almost apologetic, saying something about bringing another one and how he didn't know they'd moved into the Porter place. The realization hit me like ice water flooding my veins. Virgil hadn't brought me here to show me family history. He'd brought me here for them, whoever they were. I crept to a broken window and peered out to see him talking to 3 men who looked like they'd stepped out of some survivalist nightmare. The biggest one had a beard down to his chest, matted with what might have been food or dirt, wearing military surplus gear and carrying a rifle casually over his shoulder. The other 2 were younger, maybe early 20s, both skinny with that hollow-cheeked look of chronic malnutrition or drug use, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line like feral animals. Virgil was gesturing toward the house, and I heard him mention something about my rental car, how it was a newer model, probably had GPS, might have cash or credit cards. The bearded one asked if I'd told anyone where I was going, and Virgil said I'd posted online, but probably hadn't given specifics to family since I'd mentioned being divorced and living alone. I knew I had maybe seconds before they came inside, so I did the only thing I could think of. I went deeper into the house, looking for a back exit. The hallway was narrow and dark, lined with more sleeping bags and boxes of ammunition, leading to what used to be bedrooms. In the last room at the end of the hall, I found something that made my situation even worse. A young woman, probably 19 or 20, sitting on a mattress on the floor, her ankle chained to an old radiator. She looked up at me with eyes that had given up hope weeks ago, her lips cracked and bleeding, wearing clothes that clearly weren't hers. Men's flannel shirt, jeans held up with rope. She didn't say anything, just pointed toward a boarded-up window in the corner, then held up 3 fingers and pointed down, which I realized meant 3 boards from the bottom were loose. I could hear footsteps on the front porch now, multiple sets, and Virgil's voice calling out, "Mr. Porter, you still in there? Found some folks who knew your great-grandmother. They got stories to share." My fingers were trembling as I grabbed the loose boards, trying to pry them free without making noise. The woman watched me work, then suddenly started coughing loudly, really selling it, hacking and wheezing to cover the sound of splintering wood. The 3rd board came free just as I heard boots entering the house, and I turned back to her, whispering that I'd get help, that I'd send police, but she just shook her head and mouthed the word, "Run." I squeezed through that opening, feeling splinters tear through my shirt and skin, dropping about 4 feet into a tangle of blackberry bushes that ripped my arms to shreds. Behind me, I could hear shouting inside the house, Virgil's voice gone high and panicked, saying I couldn't have gone far, that I was just some soft city boy who wouldn't last an hour in these woods. The bearded man was barking orders, sending the 2 younger ones around the sides of the house while he went through the back. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush with no idea where I was going, just knowing I needed to put distance between me and that house. The mountain terrain was against me. Every direction seemed to go either straight up or straight down, and my legs were already burning from the elevation. I could hear them behind me, spreading out, calling to each other in some kind of code using bird whistles. My phone still had signal, barely 1 bar, and I tried calling 911 while running, but the dispatcher could barely hear me over my panting and the crashing sounds. I managed to gasp out Copper Creek Ridge and kidnapped woman before I tripped over a root and went tumbling down a steep embankment, my phone flying from my hand and disappearing into the thick undergrowth. When I finally stopped rolling, I was at the bottom of a ravine covered in mud and leaves, my ankles screaming in pain, and I could hear those bird whistles getting closer from 3 different directions above me. The ravine had a small creek running through it, barely a trickle really, but it gave me an idea from some half-remembered survival show. I started moving downstream, staying in the water to mask my tracks and scent, biting down on my sleeve to keep from crying out each time my twisted ankle hit a rock. The cold mountain water numbed the pain after a while, but it also made my whole body start shaking uncontrollably. I followed that creek for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, the whistles growing fainter behind me, until I heard the most beautiful sound in the world: traffic. The creek went under a culvert beneath a 2-lane road, and I dragged myself up the embankment, probably looking like something from a horror movie with all the mud and blood. A pickup truck stopped almost immediately, an elderly couple inside, and I must have babbled incoherently about kidnappers and a woman chained in a house because they locked their doors at first. But then the wife recognized the genuine terror in my eyes and called 911 while her husband kept a shotgun trained on the woods behind me. The state police found the house on Copper Creek Ridge 3 hours later, but it was empty, cleared out completely, like no one had ever been there. Even the trash and sleeping bags were gone, just my footprints in the dust and the window I'd escaped through, as evidence I'd been there at all. They never found the woman, Virgil, or the 3 men, though they did find my rental car burned out in a ravine 20 miles away. The detective assigned to my case said these groups move fast when they're exposed, probably had contingency plans and multiple sites throughout the mountains. He also said I was lucky. They'd found remains of 2 other genealogy enthusiasts in those hills over the past 5 years, both who'd hired local guides from online forums. I still wake up sometimes thinking about that woman, wondering if she's still alive, if she knew she was saving my life when she made that distraction. The FBI added my photos and testimony to an ongoing investigation into human trafficking rings operating in rural Appalachia. But they warned me these cases rarely get solved. Too much wilderness, too many places to hide, and locals who've learned to look the other way. I never did find out anything more about my great-grandmother's family, and honestly, I'm okay with that now. Some stones are better left unturned, some roots better left untraced. Last August, I was 32 and had just gone through the worst breakup of my life after 7 years together. My therapist suggested I needed to reconnect with myself, find who I was outside of that relationship, and honestly, I just needed to get away from everything. I'd been hiking since college, done sections of the Appalachian Trail maybe a dozen times, always with groups or at least one other person. But that summer, I decided to do a week-long solo trip through a less popular section in Virginia, near the border with Tennessee. I worked as a graphic designer remotely, had plenty of saved vacation days, and figured the solitude would help clear my head. The plan was simple: park at one trailhead, arrange for a shuttle pickup 60 miles north, and just walk. No cell service for most of it, just me, my pack, and the mountains I'd loved since I was a kid growing up in Roanoke. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. That peaceful exhaustion where your body aches but your mind finally shuts up, you know. I was making good time, about 15 miles a day, camping at established sites when I could find them, hammock camping when I couldn't. It was Tuesday afternoon when things started getting weird. I'd stopped to filter water at this creek crossing, maybe 4 miles from where I planned to camp that night, and I noticed fresh boot prints in the mud beside mine. Big ones, probably size 12 or 13, with this distinctive tread pattern. Diagonal lines crossing in a diamond shape with a deep heel. Nothing strange about seeing other prints on the trail, except these were going the same direction as me, and I hadn't seen another soul since Sunday morning when an older couple passed me heading south. The prints looked maybe an hour old, 2 at most, the edges still sharp in the damp soil. I kept hiking, telling myself it was just another hiker ahead of me, probably camping at the same spot I was headed to. There was a nice flat area near a spring marked on my map. But when I got there around 6 that evening, the site was empty. No tent, no gear, nothing. The weird part, those same boot prints were all around the camping area, like someone had walked the entire perimeter, stopped at different spots, maybe stood there for a while based on how deep some of the impressions were. They went behind trees, circled the fire ring twice, even went right up to where I'd started setting up my bright orange tent before I noticed them. And then the tracks just left, heading back south the way I'd come. I remember standing there with my trekking poles still in my hands, trying to make sense of it. Why would someone hike all the way here, walk around the entire campsite like they were inspecting it, and then turn around? That night, I barely slept. Every sound had me reaching for my headlamp, branches creaking, leaves rustling, the usual forest noise that never bothered me before. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something that definitely wasn't normal. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the leaf litter maybe 30 feet from my tent. They'd take 3 or 4 steps, then stop for what felt like forever, then move again. I lay there in my sleeping bag, gripping my knife, trying to control my breathing so I could hear better. The footsteps circled my entire camp, pausing longest on the side where my food bag was hung, though it was a good 12 feet up and properly distanced from any tree trunk. After maybe 20 minutes of this, they moved away, heading north up the trail. I wanted to look outside, see who it was, but something in my gut told me to stay still, stay quiet. I waited another hour before I finally unzipped my tent and checked around with my headlamp. Those diamond pattern boots had been everywhere, figure 8s around my tent, a long line where someone had stood facing my tent door, even prints on top of a fallen log like someone had climbed up to get a better view. Wednesday morning, I seriously considered turning back. But I was 3 days in, slightly closer to my pickup point than my car, and I kept telling myself, maybe it was just some weird guy who liked night hiking. Creepy, sure, but not necessarily dangerous. I packed up as soon as there was enough light to see the trail without a headlamp around 5:30 a.m., skipping breakfast because I wanted to put distance between me and whoever those boots belonged to. The trail that day was supposed to cross 2 Forest Service roads, and I remember thinking if things got worse, I could bail out at one of those, try to hitch a ride or at least have an escape route. But first, I had to navigate this section that went along a ridgeline for about 8 miles. The thing about ridge trails is you can see pretty far in both directions when the trees thin out, which should have been reassuring. About 3 hours into hiking, I reached the first viewpoint, this rocky outcrop with a gorgeous view of the valley below. I stopped to drink some water and eat a protein bar, finally starting to relax a little with the morning sun warming my face. That's when I saw him, or at least I saw movement. Maybe 400 yards back on the trail I'd just hiked, where it curved around a huge boulder, there was someone. Just a flash of dark clothing before they stepped back behind the rock. I grabbed my little binoculars from my hip belt pocket and watched that spot for probably 5 minutes. Nothing. But I knew someone was there. The way they'd moved, quick and purposeful, like they'd realized they were visible and corrected the mistake. I kept the binoculars up and scanned the trail behind me, and that's when I noticed something that made my whole body go cold. About 100 yards back, there was a fresh blaze on a tree, the orange paint still glossy. But the weird thing was, it was facing the wrong direction, pointing off the trail to the left, where there was nothing but steep slope and thick underbrush. I started hiking faster, my mind racing. The Appalachian Trail uses white blazes, and side trails use blue. Orange blazes aren't official, but sometimes trail maintainers use them temporarily for reroutes. This one, though, it was deliberately misleading. I started paying closer attention to the trail markers, and over the next 2 miles I found 3 more fake blazes. Fresh orange paint on trees, all pointing off the actual trail into areas that would get someone seriously lost. At one spot, I could see where the real white blaze had been scraped off the tree bark with something sharp, leaving pale exposed wood underneath. Someone was trying to get me off the trail, and they'd been out here preparing for it. The precision of it terrified me more than the footsteps had. This wasn't some random creep. This was planned. My phone had been dead since Monday, no signal to even justify keeping it on. But I turned it on anyway, hoping for a miracle bar of service. Nothing. The first Forest Service road was supposed to be around mile marker 847 according to my map. When I finally saw the wooden post through the trees, I nearly cried with relief. But when I got closer, the numbers had been scratched out with something sharp, deep gouges in the wood that left splinters hanging off. The gravel road was there, though, exactly where it should be, cutting across the trail and disappearing into the trees on both sides. I stood there in the middle of that road, looking both directions, trying to decide if I should bail. It was Wednesday afternoon, maybe 2 p.m. If I followed the road, it would eventually hit a main highway, but I had no idea how far. Could be 5 miles, could be 15. While I stood there debating, I heard a branch snap in the woods behind me, maybe 50 feet back. Not the random crack of a falling limb. This was the sharp sound of someone stepping on dead wood. I didn't turn around. I just started walking north on the trail again, faster now, my trekking poles clicking against rocks like a frantic metronome. The next 4 miles were the longest of my life. I was practically jogging on the flat sections, my pack bouncing painfully against my spine, sweat soaking through everything despite the cool mountain air. Every time the trail curved, I'd look back, and sometimes I'd catch just the edge of movement, a shoulder disappearing behind a tree, a flash of something dark against the green. He was keeping pace with me perfectly, staying just far enough back that I could never get a clear look, but close enough that I knew he was there. The second Forest Service road should have been my salvation, but when I reached it, my heart sank. A huge oak had fallen across the trail right at the intersection, and someone had spray-painted arrows on it, one pointing left down the road with "Trail Detour" in neat block letters, another pointing right into dense forest with the same message. Both were lies. I could see the white blaze on a tree straight ahead, past the fallen oak. But the really sick part? There were fresh boot prints going both directions, those same diamond patterns, like he'd walked both fake routes to make the tracks look legitimate. I climbed over the oak, scraping my shins on the rough bark, and kept going on the real trail. But now I was second-guessing everything. Every blaze looked suspicious. Every cairn could be fake. When the trail split around a rock formation and I couldn't see a marker for either path, I stood there paralyzed for probably 2 full minutes, trying to remember which way the map showed. The left path looked more worn. But was that because it was the real trail, or because he'd walked it multiple times to make it look that way? I finally chose left, and after 100 yards found a white blaze and nearly sobbed with relief. But then I started thinking, what if he wasn't trying to get me lost? What if he was hurting me somewhere specific? The thought made me want to sit down right there on the trail and give up. It was getting late, maybe 5 p.m., and I needed to find somewhere to camp soon. But the idea of stopping, of being stationary while he was out there, made bile rise in my throat. That's when I remembered something from my map. There was a trail shelter about 2 miles ahead, one of those 3-sided lean-tos the trail maintains for hikers. They're usually near water sources and have other people around. Safety in numbers, right? I pushed harder, my legs burning, and reached the shelter just as the sun was starting to dip behind the mountain. And thank God, there were people there. A young couple from Ohio, probably mid-20s, setting up their sleeping bags in the shelter. I've never been so happy to see strangers in my life. I told them everything, words tumbling out while I set up my tent nearby. About the footprints, the fake blazes, the man following me. The guy, Brian, immediately offered to check around the perimeter while his girlfriend Ashley helped me string up my food bag. They found boot prints, those same diamond patterns, all around the shelter area, some less than an hour old based on how the afternoon rain had only partially filled them. Brian said he had a satellite communicator and offered to send a message to the authorities, but what would I say? Some guy is hiking near me and putting up fake trail markers? We agreed that all 3 of us would keep watch in shifts that night. Nothing happened during my watch from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., just the normal sounds of the forest and Ashley's soft snoring from the shelter. Brian took over after me, and I actually managed to fall asleep from pure exhaustion. I woke up to Brian shaking my tent at dawn. He was white as a sheet. During his watch, around 3 a.m., he'd seen someone standing at the edge of the clearing, just visible in the moonlight. Tall, wearing dark clothes, completely still. Brian had shined his headlamp at him, and the guy had just turned and walked back into the forest, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. But here's what really got us. When we checked the trail signs that morning, the white blazes leading north from the shelter had been painted over with black paint during the night. Fresh paint, still tacky to the touch. The only blazes left visible were orange ones leading east, off the main trail, into a section of forest I knew from my map led to an old abandoned mining area. Ashley pulled out her phone, which miraculously had 1 bar of service, and called 911. The dispatcher said they'd send a ranger, but it could take hours for someone to hike in. We decided to stick together and hike south, back the way I'd come, toward the Forest Service Road where we might meet the ranger sooner. We made it about 3 miles before we met the ranger coming up the trail. A woman named Officer Diane Reeves, been working these mountains for 15 years. When we told her everything, showed her photos Brian had taken of the painted-over blazes and the boot prints, her face went hard in a way that scared me more than anything else had. She radioed for backup immediately and told us we needed to get out of the forest now. As we hiked down to her truck at the Forest Service Road, she explained that they'd been looking for someone who'd been doing this for months, following solo hikers, mostly women, trying to redirect them off trail. 2 hikers had gone missing in the past year in this section, both solo women, both experienced. They'd found one of them 3 months later in an old mine shaft, alive but with 2 broken legs from the fall. She'd said someone had been following her, changing trail markers, but everyone thought she'd just gotten confused and paranoid from dehydration. The other woman was still missing. Officer Reeves said the guy apparently had some kind of obsession with controlling the trail, deciding who could pass through his section of forest. They'd found multiple campsites deep off-trail with journals full of notes about hikers he'd watched, detailed descriptions, dates, where they'd camped, which routes they'd taken. Brian and Ashley drove me back to my car at the southern trailhead. There was no way I was finishing that hike. 2 weeks later, Officer Reeves called me. They'd arrested someone, a 43-year-old man named Nathan Cray who lived in a cabin about 5 miles from the trail. He'd been a trail maintainer volunteer years ago, knew every inch of those paths, every shortcut, every place someone could get lost. In his cabin, they found cans of spray paint, trail maintenance equipment, and notebooks with detailed plans for redirecting hikers. My name wasn't in there. I'd apparently been a target of opportunity, but there were pages about other solo hikers, some dating back 3 years. The really sick part was that he never physically hurt anyone directly. He just wanted to control where they went, to prove he could manipulate them, make them lost, make them dependent on following his marks. The woman who'd gone missing was found alive a month later, living in a cave system where his orange blazes had led her, surviving on the supplies he'd been leaving for her. She thought she'd been lost the whole time, following what she believed were official trail markers. I still hike, but never alone anymore, and I check every single blaze against my GPS. And sometimes, when I'm out there and I see boot prints on the trail, especially big ones with distinctive treads, I still feel that cold grip in my chest, wondering who's walking behind me and what they want. The year was 2016, and I'd been hauling freight across the country for nearly 2 decades. Most people don't realize how lonely those long stretches of highway can get, especially when you're pushing through the night to make a delivery deadline. I was running a load of electronics from a warehouse in Pennsylvania down to a distribution center in North Carolina, and my GPS had been acting up since I'd crossed into West Virginia. The main interstate was backed up for miles due to some accident involving multiple semis, and every trucker on the CB was talking about the 5-hour delay. That's when my GPS recalculated and showed me this alternative route through the mountains that would supposedly save me 3 hours. I should have known better than to trust technology over my gut instinct, but the pressure from dispatch to deliver on time was weighing heavy on my mind. The suggested route took me off the interstate near a small town whose name I can't even remember now. Just a cluster of old buildings and a single gas station that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. The road started decent enough, 2 lanes of worn asphalt winding up into the mountains, past old farmhouses with rusted tractors in their yards and mobile homes set back in the trees. But after about 40 minutes, the pavement turned to gravel, and the trees pressed in so close that their branches scraped against my trailer. My 18-wheeler wasn't built for roads like this, and every pothole sent a jolt through the cab that made my teeth rattle. The GPS kept insisting I was on the right path, showing this thin line cutting through the mountains that would connect back to a main road on the other side. What really should have made me turn around was when I passed the first no trespassing sign, but it looked so old and weathered that I figured it was probably from some defunct logging company. About 20 minutes deeper into the mountains, the gravel road narrowed even more and started climbing at a steep angle that had my engine straining. The trees opened up briefly, and I could see these massive scars cut into the mountainside, old mining operations from what I could tell, with rusted equipment scattered around like metal bones. That's when I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt, big ones from heavy machinery, cutting deep grooves that my truck's wheels followed like train tracks. The GPS showed I was still on course, but nothing about this felt right anymore. There were new chain-link fences appearing alongside the road, topped with razor wire that definitely wasn't ancient, and security cameras mounted on posts every 100 yards or so. My CB radio had gone completely dead, just static no matter what channel I tried, and my cell phone showed no signal bars at all. The isolation hit me then, realizing that nobody knew exactly where I was, and if something happened, it could be days before anyone thought to look for me on this forgotten mountain road. The road suddenly opened into a cleared area, and that's when I saw them, 4 pickup trucks parked sideways across the path, blocking any way forward. These weren't old mountain junkers either. They were new, heavy-duty trucks with tinted windows and modified suspensions. Before I could even think about backing up my rig, which would have been nearly impossible on that narrow road anyway, men started getting out of the trucks. They moved with purpose, spreading out in a semicircle, and every single one of them was carrying a rifle. Not hunting rifles either. These were military-style weapons, and the men holding them didn't look like they were out for deer season. They wore matching black tactical vests over camouflage clothing, and their faces were hard, weathered, like they'd spent their whole lives in these mountains. The one who seemed to be in charge, a tall guy with a gray beard and cold blue eyes, raised his hand for me to stop, though where exactly he thought I was going to go with a 53-foot trailer on a single-lane mountain road was beyond me. I rolled down my window slowly, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel because I've seen enough news stories to know how these situations can go wrong fast. The leader approached my cab, his rifle held casual but ready, and I could see old prison tattoos creeping up from under his collar. "You're a long way from the interstate, driver," he said in this calm voice that was somehow more threatening than if he'd been yelling. Behind him I could now see what they were protecting. Further up the cleared area were several large metal buildings, the kind you'd use for industrial work. And there was this chemical smell in the air that burned my nostrils. Dozens of barrels were stacked outside, and I could see more men moving between the buildings, some wearing what looked like hazmat gear. The whole setup screamed meth lab, but on a scale I'd never imagined possible. The leader must have seen me putting it together because his expression hardened, and he shifted his rifle just enough to make his point clear. "Here's the situation," he said, leaning against my door like we were having a friendly chat, except his knuckles were white where they gripped his weapon. "You took a wrong turn. Happens sometimes when folks trust their computers too much. Now, we got 2 ways this can go. The easy way is you forget you ever saw this place, forget this road exists, and we escort you back down the mountain nice and peaceful. You tell anyone who asks that your GPS led you to a dead end, and you had to turn around. Simple story. Nothing interesting about it." He paused to let that sink in, and I noticed one of his men had walked behind my truck, probably taking pictures of my license plate and DOT numbers. "The hard way," he continued, and his voice dropped lower. "Well, trucks break down on these mountain roads all the time. Sometimes they roll off cliffs in the fog. Sometimes drivers just disappear, leave their rigs behind and vanish. These mountains are full of old mine shafts that go down hundreds of feet. A man could fall into one and never be found." The casualness of the threat made my mouth go completely dry, and I had to swallow twice before I could speak. "I just want to get out of here," I managed to say, surprised at how steady my voice sounded when every muscle in my body was tensed up like a coiled spring. "GPS made a mistake. I'll go back the way I came. No problems, no questions." The leader studied me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was the type to keep quiet or run straight to the cops. What he didn't know was that I had my own reasons for avoiding law enforcement. A couple of old possession charges from my younger days that made me nervous around badges, even when I wasn't doing anything wrong. He must have seen something in my face that satisfied him because he stepped back and whistled sharp and loud. 2 of his men immediately jogged to their trucks and started them up, while another one walked up to my cab and climbed onto the running board on the passenger side, close enough that I could smell the tobacco and gun oil on him. "Here's how this works," the leader explained, pulling out a cell phone and taking a picture of me right through the windshield. "My boys are going to guide you down the mountain. You're going to follow nice and slow, and my man here is going to ride with you to make sure you don't get any clever ideas. When we get to the main road, you're going to continue on your route and forget this ever happened. But just so we're clear, we've got your face, your truck number, and by now we know which company you work for and probably where you live. The people I work for have reach you wouldn't believe. They've got friends in truck stops, way stations, dispatch offices. You talk about what you saw here, and we'll know about it before the words finish leaving your mouth. And then we'll come find you. Not here in these mountains. but maybe at that truck stop you always eat breakfast at, or that rest area where you like to catch a few hours of sleep. Could be tomorrow, could be next year, but we'll come." He patted the door of my cab almost affectionately. "But if you keep quiet, you'll never hear from us again. You'll just be another driver who took a wrong turn and lived to tell about it. Or rather, lived to not tell about it." The next hour was the longest of my life as I followed the lead truck back down that mountain road, trying to navigate my massive rig in reverse for nearly half a mile before we reached a spot wide enough to turn around. The armed man riding on my running board never said a word, just stared at me through the passenger window, with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much violence to care about adding more to the tally. My knuckles ached from gripping the wheel so tight, and sweat was running down my back despite the air conditioning blasting in the cab. Every bump and turn felt like it might be the moment they decided I was too much of a risk, that it would be easier to just make me disappear. I kept thinking about my daughter in community college, how she'd never know what happened to her old man if these men decided to put me in one of those mine shafts. The worst part was passing those security cameras again, knowing that footage of my truck was being stored somewhere, evidence that could be used against me if I ever changed my mind about keeping quiet. When we finally reached the paved road at the bottom of the mountain, the pickup trucks pulled to the side, and the man on my running board hopped off without a word. The leader walked up one more time, this time carrying something in his hand, a prepaid cell phone which he tossed through my open window onto the passenger seat. "That phone's going to ring once in the next few days," he said, lighting a cigarette and taking a long drag. "When it does, you answer and tell whoever's on the other end that you understand the situation and you're going to be smart about it. After that call, destroy the phone and throw it away in a different state. This is us being reasonable, giving you a chance to walk away clean. Not everyone who finds our operation gets that chance. Some of them are probably still up there, somewhere deep in those old shafts, their trucks stripped and crushed into cubes at some scrapyard 3 states away. You seem like a smart man with something to live for, so I'm betting you'll make the right choice." He stepped back and waved me forward, and I didn't need any more encouragement to get the hell out of there. I drove for 3 hours straight before I stopped, pulling into a busy truck stop where the normal world of drivers complaining about way stations and traffic suddenly felt like the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. My hands were still trembling when I tried to drink my coffee, and I spilled half of it on my shirt. The prepaid phone sat in my pocket like a live grenade, and sure enough, 2 days later when I was parked for the night in Georgia, it rang. The voice on the other end was different from the mountain leader, younger and businesslike, asking only if I understood the importance of discretion. I said yes, ended the call, and at the next truck stop I smashed that phone with a hammer and threw the pieces in 3 different dumpsters across 2 states. For weeks after, every time I saw a pickup truck in my mirrors, my chest would tighten up. Every new face at the truck stops I frequented made me nervous. I started taking different routes, avoiding West Virginia entirely even if it added hours to my delivery time. The paranoia was eating at me so bad that I almost quit trucking altogether, but I had bills to pay and a daughter to support. It's been 7 years now, and I still won't drive through that part of the Appalachians. I switched companies twice, partly to confuse anyone who might be keeping tabs on me, and partly because I needed fresh starts where nobody asked why I refused certain routes. Sometimes I wonder if that operation is still running up in those mountains, if other drivers have stumbled onto it and made different choices than I did. I check the news occasionally for stories about bodies found in old mine shafts or missing truckers in West Virginia, and there have been a few that made me wonder. But I keep my mouth shut, just like I promised. Even writing this out now, years later and anonymous on the internet, makes me nervous. I changed enough details that maybe it doesn't matter. Different year, different cargo, some facts shifted around, but the fear never really goes away. The truth is, I got lucky that day. Those men could have easily decided I was too much of a liability and made me disappear forever in those mountains. Instead, they gave me a choice, and I took the one that let me keep breathing. Some might call me a coward for not going to the authorities, But those people have never had rifles pointed at them by men with dead eyes who talk about murder like it's the weather. I made it home to see my daughter graduate, walked her down the aisle at her wedding last year, and that's worth more to me than being a dead hero in a mine shaft. The parking area near Klingman's Dome was almost empty when I got there. Just 2 cars with out-of-state plates and a muddy Jeep that looked like it had been sitting there for days. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school in North Carolina, and camping alone in the Appalachians seemed like the perfect way to decompress before starting my first real job. Wednesday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, the mountain air had that specific quality where you can smell rain that fell hours ago, mixed with pine needles and damp earth. I'd done this plenty of times before, picked a trail, hiked a few miles in, found a good spot near water, and spent a couple nights pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. My dad always got my GPS coordinates every few hours. My pack had everything I could possibly need, and I'd researched this particular backcountry area for weeks before driving up here. The ranger station was closed, which made sense for a weekday, so I grabbed a permit from the self-service box and started hiking. About 10 minutes in, I passed a couple coming back toward the parking lot, matching Columbia jackets, those expensive hiking poles that probably cost more than my entire setup, both of them looking tired but satisfied with their day. The woman slowed down when she saw me, her face shifting from that peaceful post-hike expression to something else. She actually stopped walking, opened her mouth like she was about to speak, but her husband kept moving and called back to her about wanting to beat traffic. She gave me this long look, then hurried after him. I adjusted my pack straps and kept going, figuring she was just another person who thought young women had no business hiking solo. The trail was gorgeous that afternoon, all filtered sunlight through the canopy and those tiny white flowers that grow in clusters along the path. I made good time, passed the 2-mile marker right as my watch showed 5:15, and found my planned camping spot by 6. It was exactly what I'd hoped for, a small clearing about 50 feet off the main trail, close enough to a creek that I could hear the water, far enough that I wouldn't have to worry about flooding if it rained. I went through my whole routine, tent up first, bear bag rope thrown over a branch about 100 feet away, water filter set up by the creek. There was another site visible through the trees, maybe 70 yards from mine, but it was empty. The only sounds were birds doing their evening calls and the creek running over rocks. I actually remember feeling proud of myself, sitting there eating my dehydrated pad thai, watching the light fade through the trees. Around 9:30, I was already in my sleeping bag, reading a paperback thriller by Headlamp when I heard the first gunshot. It was distant but unmistakable, that sharp crack that echoes differently than thunder or falling branches. Then another one, maybe 30 seconds later, then 3 more in quick succession. I sat up, turned off my headlamp, and listened. These weren't the evenly spaced shots you'd expect from target practice, and hunting season was months away. Plus, who hunts at night in a national park? The shots kept coming, sometimes singles, sometimes rapid clusters, for maybe 10 minutes total. They seemed to be coming from somewhere up the ridge, but sound travels weird in the mountains, so I couldn't be sure. I told myself it was probably just locals spotlighting deer illegally, maybe a mile or 2 away. Still, I double-checked that my knife was within reach and made sure my phone had signal. 2 bars, barely enough to text, but there if I needed it. I barely slept that night. Every small sound had me wide awake. A branch cracking, an owl calling, the wind picking up around midnight. At one point, maybe around 2 in the morning, I heard something moving through the brush near my camp. Not the careful steps of a deer or the shuffling of a bear, but deliberate, measured movement, like someone trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. I held perfectly still, barely breathing, my hand wrapped around the handle of my knife. The footsteps circled my tent twice, stopped near where I'd hung my bear bag, then moved away toward the creek. I wanted to look, wanted to shine my flashlight out there, but something deep in my gut told me to stay silent, stay invisible. After maybe 20 minutes, the forest went back to its normal night sounds, but I stayed awake until the sky started getting light around 5:30. The moment there was enough light to see the trail, I crawled out of my tent, planning to pack up immediately and get back to my car. That's when I saw the blood. Not a lot at first, just dark spots on some leaves about 20 feet from my tent, leading toward the main trail. Fresh enough that it was still dark red, not the rusty brown of old blood. I followed the drops, and they got heavier as I moved toward the trail. Then I found the shell casings. 9 of them, scattered in the dirt where the side path met the main trail. They were brass, still shiny, 9mm from what I could tell. My hands started trembling as I picked one up. It was cold but clean. Couldn't have been there more than a few hours. The blood trail continued up the main trail for another 30 yards before veering off into thick undergrowth. There was a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch where the trail disappeared into the woods. Looked like gray fleece or maybe sweatshirt material, with a dark stain that could only be blood. I ran back to my campsite and threw everything into my pack, not even bothering to fold the tent properly. My phone had 1 bar, and I managed to call 911, but the connection was terrible. The dispatcher kept cutting out, and I had to repeat myself 3 times before she understood where I was. She said she'd send rangers to check it out and told me to get back to the parking area immediately. I practically jogged the 3 miles back, my pack bouncing against my spine, looking behind me every few seconds. The parking lot had a few more cars when I got there, including a Park Service truck. 2 rangers were standing by the information board, and I rushed over to them, probably looking absolutely insane, with my hair still in yesterday's braid and my tent poles sticking out of my pack at weird angles. The older ranger, a guy with a graying mustache and a name tag that said Donovan, listened to my story with this expression that went from concerned to skeptical to almost dismissive. His partner, a younger woman named Gutierrez, took notes but kept exchanging glances with Donovan. When I showed them the shell casing I'd kept, Donovan turned it over in his fingers and said it was probably from hunters who'd gotten turned around, maybe tracking a wounded deer. I told him about the footsteps around my tent, about the pattern of shots, about the fabric with blood. He said black bears sometimes investigate campsites at night and that injured animals often leave blood trails. Gutierrez asked if I'd actually seen anyone get shot, if I'd heard screaming or calls for help. When I said no, she put her notepad away and said they'd send someone to check the area, but it was likely just poaching activity. Donovan actually patted my shoulder and said solo camping could be intense for anyone, especially after hearing unexpected gunfire. I drove home feeling like I was losing my mind, replaying everything over and over. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'd let my imagination run wild after hearing those shots. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footsteps, so measured and careful, definitely human. That afternoon, I did what any 23-year-old does when they need answers. I went down an internet rabbit hole. I started with local news sites, searching for anything about the Clingman's Dome area. Nothing recent. Then I tried broader searches about incidents in that part of the Appalachians. On page 3 of Google results, I found a forum post from 2 months earlier. A woman named Jessica had written about her friend going missing after a solo hike in the same area. The friend, Allison, had told Jessica she was doing a 3-day trek, sent a few photos from the trail, then stopped responding to texts. Her car was found at the trailhead. Her campsite was intact, but Allison was gone. The Park Service said she probably got lost, fell somewhere remote. But Jessica mentioned something that made my chest tighten. Allison had texted her the night before she disappeared about hearing strange noises, possibly gunshots. I kept digging, found a missing persons database for the Southeast, started filtering by location and date. 3 women in the past 18 months all disappeared within a 15-mile radius of where I'd camped. Bethany Marsh, 28, experienced hiker from Knoxville, vanished during a solo trip. Courtney Huang, 31, trail runner from Asheville. Went for what should have been a 4-hour run and never came back. Rosa Vega, 26, photographer from Atlanta, told her roommate she was going to catch sunrise photos in the mountains. All of them were alone. All of them were physically fit, experienced outdoors. The official reports mentioned various theories: wildlife encounters, falls, getting lost, but none of their bodies were ever found. I started cross-referencing their disappearances with hunting seasons, moon phases, weather patterns, trying to find some connection. Then I found a blog post from a year ago, written by someone claiming to be Rosa's sister. She said Rosa had called her the night before she disappeared, mentioned that she'd run into some local men on the trail who made her uncomfortable, guys who seemed to know she was camping alone and kept asking exactly where her site was. My discovery got worse. I found a Facebook group for Appalachian trail safety, and buried in the comments of a post about solo hiking, a woman named Karen described an encounter from last year. She'd been camping near Klingman's Dome when she woke up to find a man standing outside her tent at 3 in the morning, just standing there, not moving. When she screamed, he walked away slowly, no rush, like he had all the time in the world. She packed up in the dark and hiked out with her headlamp. When she reported it, she got the same response I did. Probably just a confused hunter, maybe someone who'd been drinking. But here's what made me nearly throw up. She mentioned finding shell casings near her tent the next morning when she went back with friends to get the water bottle she'd dropped in her panic. Same area, same dismissive rangers. She ended her comment saying she'd never hike alone again and warned other women to avoid that section of trail. I called the FBI tip line that night, told them everything. My experience, the missing women, the patterns I'd found. The agent who took my information sounded more interested than the rangers had been, said they'd look into it, that I should forward all the links and screenshots I'd collected. I did, but months passed with no follow-up. I tried calling the families of the missing women, but only Jessica called me back. We talked for 3 hours. She told me Allison had been getting weird messages on her hiking Instagram before the trip, comments from an account with no profile picture asking about her solo routes, saying he'd love to run into her on the trail sometime. The account was deleted after she disappeared. We compared notes, created a timeline, even considered going to the media. But without bodies, without proof of foul play, we were just two women with a theory about connected disappearances that authorities had already written off as accidents. Then last month everything changed. A massive thunderstorm system hit the Smokies, caused major flooding and landslides throughout the region. A road crew working to clear debris on a service road about 2 miles from where I'd camped found something in a washout. Bones. Human bones, along with fragments of clothing and camping gear. The news broke slowly. First just a mention of remains being found, then confirmation they were human, then the horrible detail that there were multiple sets. Within a week, forensics had identified Bethany Marsh and Rosa Vega through dental records. Courtney Huang's distinctive titanium hip replacement from an old climbing accident identified her remains. They found 2 other sets of bones that haven't been identified yet, possibly older cases that were never connected to the area. The medical examiner found evidence of gunshot wounds on several of the bones, clean holes through ribs, a shattered femur consistent with a high-velocity bullet impact. The whole area is now a crime scene, and the FBI has taken over the investigation completely. The couple I'd passed on the trail that day came forward after seeing the news. The woman, Elaine Crawford, told reporters she'd tried to warn me because she'd heard the gunshots the night before and found blood on the trail that morning, just like I did. But she said there was something else, something she hadn't told her husband or the rangers at the time. She'd seen a man that morning, about a quarter mile from where they'd passed me, sitting on a rock beside the trail cleaning a handgun. He was wearing civilian clothes but had a radio that looked like Park Service equipment. When she saw him, he smiled at her, stood up slowly, and walked into the woods without saying a word. She said his calm demeanor terrified her more than the gun itself, and she'd hurried her husband along, wanting to get away from there as quickly as possible. She'd been having nightmares about that smile for over 2 years, and when she saw my face on the trail that day, young and alone and heading in that direction, She'd wanted to grab me and physically drag me back to the parking lot. I think about that moment all the time now, how close I came to being another set of bones in that washout. Jessica and I still text sometimes, both of us following the investigation obsessively. They haven't made any arrests yet, but the FBI has been interviewing current and former Park Service employees, and there's talk about someone who knew the area intimately, who could move through it freely without raising suspicion. I've started carrying a gun myself now, even though I never go hiking alone anymore. Some experiences change you in ways you can't undo, and knowing you walked right through someone's hunting ground, that you were probably being watched and evaluated and somehow found wanting or got lucky, that stays with you forever. Driving through those back roads felt like the kind of freedom I had been craving for weeks. I was on my way to a hiking spot deeper in the Appalachian Mountains, just me, my rental car, and a few bags tossed in the back seat. The day had started calm, gray clouds hanging low but nothing unusual. My GPS lost service miles earlier, and the last sign I remembered said something about coal country, but the letters were so worn out they could have been decades old. I didn't worry at first. I'd taken detours plenty of times during road trips, and they usually led me to small diners or quiet towns where I could stretch my legs and grab a coffee. That comfort faded quick when the asphalt narrowed and the houses started looking abandoned, but not completely. There were structures lining the road that looked like they hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since the 70s. Leaning porches, windows boarded on the bottom floor while the top ones were cracked open just enough to suggest someone might still be living inside. Rusting mining equipment sat in yards like forgotten statues, and in more than one driveway I noticed an old pickup truck with mismatched panels, some with no plates at all. I remember rolling my windows up tight, even though the air outside was damp and heavy. The deeper I went, the less it felt like I had stumbled onto a normal town. It was like the place existed halfway between abandoned and alive, with just enough signs of life to keep me on edge. I tried looping back, thinking I'd missed a turn, but every intersection led me further in. The streets curved sharply, rising and dropping with the mountains, so my sense of direction was useless. That's when I noticed the first truck pulling out from a side road behind me. It was pale green, maybe a Ford from the 80s, dented on the side, the kind of vehicle that looked more like farm equipment than something meant for the road. At first, I convinced myself it was coincidence. People lived here after all. Someone driving behind me didn't mean anything. But when I took the next left, the truck did too. And when I slowed near a stop sign with no sign on it, they slowed too. That's when the pressure in my chest started building. A mile or two later, another truck appeared. This one was darker, maybe navy once, now eaten through with rust. It came from the opposite direction and eased in behind me like it had been waiting. My rearview mirror was filled with grills and headlights that flickered as if the electrical systems were failing. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, telling myself not to panic, not to overthink it. But then a third vehicle joined in from a gravel drive, this one black with a shattered headlight, and the way they started circling me along those one-lane streets didn't feel random anymore. Each road I tried, they were there. Like the whole town had turned into a maze designed to keep me trapped. At some point I slowed almost to a crawl, hoping one of them would just pass me, but none of them did. They stayed close, engines rattling, the sound bouncing off the narrow houses on either side like I was being herded. A single streetlight buzzed overhead, casting this faint orange glow that only made the cracked pavement look more warped. I tried pulling into what looked like an old gas station lot, weeds sprouting through the concrete, but as soon as I stopped, one of the trucks rolled in behind me, blocking the exit. My heart pounded so loud I thought they'd hear it from inside their cab. I didn't even let the car fully stop. I jerked the wheel and sped through a side path that seemed barely wide enough for a vehicle. The road twisted downhill, lined with fences falling apart and mailboxes collapsed in the dirt. That's when I noticed figures on the porches watching. They weren't talking or waving, just standing still in shadows, heads following as my headlights passed. I couldn't make out faces, only outlines, but there was no mistaking the way they lingered like they'd been waiting for me. I pressed harder on the gas. My GPS was useless, the screen frozen on a map with no roads, and the compass in the dashboard spun lazily like it couldn't decide which direction I was facing. Every turn seemed to bring me deeper, not out. Then came the sound of gravel spraying behind me. One of the trucks had cut across a yard, tires crunching over debris, and now it was alongside me, trying to edge me closer to the ditch. I could see the driver's silhouette, broad shoulders, a cap pulled low, but no details. They never rolled the windows down, never shouted, just stared straight ahead while inching closer, like this was routine. I swerved away, tires skidding, the steering wheel vibrating under my grip. For a second, I thought I was going to lose control completely. My headlights hit a row of collapsing sheds, then the road veered sharply right, and I just prayed nothing was coming from the other direction. When I straightened out, 2 more trucks waited at the bottom of the hill, angled across the road like barricades. Their headlights glared straight at me, bright and blinding, while my own reflection bounced across their rusted chrome. I slowed, unsure if I could squeeze between them, but the green one from before was closing fast behind me, hemming me in. The sense that this wasn't random hit me harder than anything. I was being boxed in, driven into a trap. My mind raced through every terrible possibility. Robbery, kidnapping, worse. I could almost hear my pulse in my ears as I searched desperately for any break in the line of buildings, any path that didn't dead end in another rusted-out fence or shadowed alley. Just when it seemed like there was no way through, I spotted a narrow dirt lane off to the right, half hidden between 2 leaning houses. It looked more like a driveway than a road, but I didn't think twice. I swerved hard, scraping the edge of a mailbox as I shot into the gap. The trucks behind me struggled to follow. Their size worked against them in the tight turn. My tires slid on loose gravel, kicking up clouds of dust so thick I could barely see the road. For a terrifying stretch, I thought I might dead end in someone's backyard, but the path kept winding uphill, curving so sharply the headlights couldn't keep up. Branches whipped against the side of the car, loud cracks against the metal, and then, finally, the road broke open. I burst out onto a wider stretch that led uphill toward the ridgeline. When I glanced in the mirror, only 2 sets of headlights were still on me, the others blocked or turned back. That tiny bit of distance gave me just enough courage to push harder. The engine roared, the whole car shaking as I climbed. I didn't know where the path was leading, but all that mattered was keeping it between me and them. My breath came in shallow bursts, every second stretched thin, every corner a gamble. At the top of the ridge, the lane spilled onto a paved road I didn't recognize, but it was real pavement. Painted lines, reflectors, even a sign pointing toward the highway. I don't think I've ever felt relief hit me so sharply. The last truck tried to follow, but by the time I hit the main road, it stayed back, idling at the edge like they knew their boundary. I sped until my vision blurred, not daring to slow until I saw a cluster of lit-up businesses miles down. When I finally stopped in a small parking lot, I sat there gripping the wheel, headlights off, waiting to see if any of them had followed. Nothing. Just silence, broken by the hum of a vending machine outside a laundromat. I never went to the police. I couldn't even explain where it had happened on a map, and a part of me wondered if anyone would believe it. It's been years since that night, but sometimes when I drive through the mountains, I still catch myself scanning every side road, every set of headlights in the rear view. That half-dead town felt like it wanted me to disappear inside it, like those trucks weren't just chasing me, but trying to keep me there. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I'll never forget the feeling that I'd stumbled into a place I was never supposed to see, and barely managed to escape.